All right, welcome everybody. I'll be on screen in 1 second. Welcome to Garden Grounds. I do this public live Q&A every third Thursday of the month, 11 o'clock Eastern Time, and I'll stay on for about 45 minutes. And feel free to put in any question you have about vegetable gardening, and I'll do my best to answer it. Also going to be talking lightly, a light topic on tomatoes and peppers, getting them into the ground. It's really important. One, you do have to be subscribed to my channel, and it only takes a second. And then I think in like 30 seconds, you can answer a question. And just make sure you put question at the beginning of the question, because a lot goes through the chat and it can be hard to pick out the questions. I will do my best to answer as many questions as I can in 45 minutes. All right, so let's get started. Again, just throw your questions out there. And let me just get this chat rolling here so I can see what's going on. All right, Eaglet, question. For tomato fungi, when is the best time to do prevention? And can tomatoes be planted in the same garden with the Three Sisters method, corn, beans, and squash? So tomatoes need a lot of room. The indeterminates are going to get a good, minimum, probably 6 feet tall, and bush out. So you can't mix them directly in with the corn, beans, and squash, because they're going to overgrow the beans, the squash, and really shade them out. So they have to be put, they can be in the same, general area, but they have to be put out to the side. They just get really big. As for tomato fungi, fungus affects most of our plants. Tomato plants, if they get a fungus 1 year, they're going to probably get them the next year. They come in through the air, the spores float in through the air. The best time to really start is prevention spraying about 2 weeks when you notice the leaf pattern, the fungus pattern shows up on the leaves. You can treat it when you see it, but it's hard to figure that out unless you take notes. So if you're just getting started with gardening, or you're trying to figure out how to get ahead of these fungi that attack your plants, go ahead and just mark down when you start seeing them, and then use your journal. You count back about 2 weeks, and then you start your spray routine. A general spray routine is about every 10 to 14 days, and that helps manage the fungi. Now, for tomatoes, I have a lot of videos on using hydrogen peroxide, a mix of H2O2, hydrogen peroxide, and water, and spraying it on the leaves. That actually kills off the fungi. So hydrogen peroxide actually kills the fungus. Other sprays kind of prevent the fungus from getting onto the plant, like a baking soda spray, etc. But if you want to learn more about a great spray that's organic, that you can make yourself, check out my videos on hydrogen peroxide in tomato plants. And I usually ask, I'd have people saying right now they can't hear me, but just want to make sure you can hear me and all that kind of stuff. All right, so let's go to the next question. What's up? Just heard for the first time about jumping worms. Started paying attention to my garden in the coastal North Carolina and have found a bad infestation. Can you speak on the subject? I wish I could offer something valuable. They are worms that my understanding is as they go through the soil, they eat up everything. They don't leave behind anything good, and they kind of take out the nutrients. That's the short version. The other short version is there's not a whole lot you can do about them. I don't know enough about the damage, the true damage, because there's a big panic about them now. And the same panic we had about lantern flies coming in, and now I have to deal with them, and they're manageable. But jumping worms are being spread through the US. You can't really stop them from showing up. The eggs can come in, when you're buying potting soil and all kinds of stuff, and they can be a problem. I just don't know enough about them. I do know at this point, I'm not aware of any kind of treatment, and you just have to kind of manage them. Girl foliage. What size container works best to grow sweet potato slips? An 18-gallon storage tote, or can I use something smaller? like a 5 or 10 gallon container? Good question. 5-gallon container is going to be too small. Sweet potatoes get, the big potato vine, lots of leaves up top. They have the sweet potatoes, which are not related to potatoes, by the way, developing in the soil. So in containers, they're going to suck the nutrients and moisture out really fast. So you definitely want a bigger container. You could probably get, 1 or 2 slips in a 10-gallon container. You're going to get smaller sweet potatoes. But I think it's really better to use an 18-gallon container. It's going to hold moisture better. You're going to run less risk of stressing your plants out. It's going to be easier to maintain. And those sweet potatoes, excuse me, are going to get to a good size. You may notice some people have a star, different colors next to their name. They are perk members. If you want to join perk memberships, go to my YouTube channel, find the join button. It's a little bit hard to find. I don't know why YouTube makes it that way. But I do 4 or 5 1-hour mentoring Q&As like I'm doing today, a couple live classes, and a Grow as We Grow series. And it's really a small group, very well-educated garden group. And it works really well for this format because maybe, 20 to 35 people are on at a time. And I can go ahead and really get in depth and answer your questions. And I do stay on for an hour. And we do that like 4 or 5 times a month. All right, looking for questions. And feel free to just type question and whatever you want me to address. Tiny Purple, who is a perk member. I have trees and rose bushes with powdery mildew. How do I keep it from getting to my plants? So you can't. You can treat it. And hold on a second here. Little technical issue. Powdery mildew comes in all kinds of different varieties or species. There's all kinds of different kinds of powdery mildew. Certain powdery mildew only affects roses or only affects your crepe myrtle trees or something like that. So just because you have it in one place doesn't mean it's going to go everywhere else. However, you have the conditions that are right probably in your garden area, in your zone, where powdery mildew thrives. So it floats in the air. It's, just like the fungus we were talking about with the tomatoes, overwinters on weeds, it gets there. So the best thing that you can do is just treat it. Pick the antifungal that you want. For trees and roses that aren't edible, I do use a chemical spray. It's called Daconil. I know some people don't want to use any chemicals. It's really effective on plants that you're not going to eat. On plants that I'm going to be eating or close to my plants, I prefer using a baking soda spray. I'll use hydrogen peroxide. I'll use different organic methods, copper, I think it's copper sulfate or copper. It's just a copper fungicide. You can find all different ones, and you just want to spray them and manage them. And as you get those plants under control, you might want to think about keeping an eye out for your tomato plants, your pepper plants, squash, zucchini, etc. The key though is, and you're not saying this, but I just want to stress that if you see powdery mildew, say on one plant, don't go and spray everything in your garden. That's extra work. Can be damaging to your plants. You should always test spray when you try new sprays out. But a lot of times you just have to focus on that specific variety of plant and treat it for the powdery mildew or the fungus. Nina, who is also a perk member, I got bare root grapevines, tips for planting it up. Do grapes like anything special? They don't necessarily like anything special, just FYI, grape roots will go down a good 10 feet, 15 feet into the ground over time. So they go way down there. You're not amending the soil, I hope, past a foot in your garden. So they know what to do. They know how to get nutrients. They don't like sitting in soggy, wet soil, so it should dry. And I mean, after big rain, it goes away. If there's puddling or your house drains to where that plant is, the slope of the ground, you probably don't want to put your grapevine there. I would put a bare root into, a gallon, 2, 3, 5-gallon container, whatever you have. Start growing it in that for a while. It's a little bit easier to maintain, keep the moisture around there. If you do put it straight in the ground, remember it only has a tiny root system, and I'm going to actually talk about that in a second related to tomatoes and peppers. So you want to water it, not every other day, but at least 3 times a week, making sure you get water around that root zone until it creeps out. One of the biggest mistakes that people make when planting their tomato and pepper transplants. Remember, they're growing inside or you're buying them, and they have these little root balls. Sometimes they're in, a cup maybe the size of my fist. So the root system is only right here. You could have a 12-inch, a 16-inch tomato, or they're in the tinier cells, even smaller, and the plant still could be 8 inches or so. When you transplant that into the ground, even if you had a soaking rain and you soak your garden, the only place those initial pepper and tomato plants are getting moisture is from that little root ball. And with the greenery, the leaves above the ground, a full day of sun, that plant's going to suck out all the moisture around that root ball. And even if there's water over here, there's no way that those roots are going to get to that. So when you first put in your pepper transplants, your tomato transplants, you can almost water them every day for a good 10 to 14 days, at least every other day when that root ball is really small. And you just have to put, 3 seconds of water right where the root ball is and come back. Once it's established over that 2-week period, then you can water less. All right, harmony with nature. How do I get rid of slugs? They are eating my kale. So 2 things eat kale. That white butterfly that flies around like crazy and it looks psychotic lays eggs on your brassicas, your kale, collards, broccoli. Those eggs produce these green worms. These green worms devastate your plant. If you're sure it's slugs and snails, I use snail and slug bait. Any brand works. You want to make sure the active ingredient is iron sulfate or sulfur. And these are just these little baited pellets. You don't pile that around the plant. You just scatter it freely. Just scatter it around where slugs hide, around your plants. They eat that, and in a couple of days, they die off. It shuts down their stomach. It works well. It's changed the way that I can garden. I use it all the time. If I didn't, my garden would be overrun with snails and slugs. If you have worms, the green caterpillar worm looking things on your leaves, I use a neem oil spray. You can check out my channel. Just look up neem oil spray. And you'll see plenty of videos on it. Spray the leaves, underside, top side. When that chewing worm eats the leaf, the azadirachtin, the chemical that's in neem oil, really shuts it down. And just on the side, neem oil should be cold pressed. I sell that at my seed shop, therustedgarden.com. If you go into Home Depot or Lowe's, and you're going to see these products that say neem oil, and when you go to the bottom left corner, it'll say hydrophobic extract of neem. If it says hydrophobic extract of neem, don't buy it. It doesn't have all the components. They process it. They just call it neem oil. The azadirachtin is removed from it. That's what shuts down chewing insects. So wherever you buy it from, you want to make sure you're buying cold pressed neem oil, and you're really making it yourself. Like I sell it in little bottles. It goes a long way. 1 or 2 tablespoons in a gallon of water with some soap. Mix it up. You spray the plant. Pharma, I saw your question, but make sure you guys, if you don't put question in front of it, there's a good chance I'm going to miss it. And Pharma says, hello, new pepper grower. Been using Neptune Harvest Rose and Bloom Fertilizer and a separate product of theirs, fish and seaweed. Is it wise to alternate each one of them every other week? So I'm going to say a couple of things. Our plants aren't that sensitive, so you don't really need to spend money on all those products. Neptune is a good company. It works. If you feel like the money matches the quality that you're getting out of it, stick with it. But for new gardeners, you really just need any organic granular fertilizer that has NP and K represented. And you set your pepper hole, your tomato hole up with that. Like when I plant my tomatoes and peppers, dig a hole 10 inches deep. What's that, 25 centimeters, 10 inches wide, 25 centimeters. Throw in some compost if you have it, some peat moss halfway, my native soil, mix it through, put in 2 or 3 tablespoons of any organic granular fertilizer. That sets up the tomato plant, the pepper plant. Water it in with any water-soluble fertilizer. I recommend AgroThrive. That's organic. I'm affiliated with them. Now, once you do that with your tomatoes and peppers, they're really set up. And to answer your question, I don't feel like you have to do this every other week unless you're growing in really small containers. You know, 2 times a month works pretty well for peppers in containers. In the ground, you don't have to do it that often. The bloom fertilizer is just usually higher in phosphorus and potassium. You could use that really once when you start seeing the flowers and just kind of let it go. But I just want to impress upon you that you don't have to spend and overfeed your plants like I do. Organic granular and composted planting, watered in with a water-soluble fertilizer. When I see it flowering, it'd be tomato, pepper, another drink of water-soluble fertilizer. Once fruit has been producing and harvesting, I feed again, maybe put some compost down. You know, I probably said more than you needed me to answer. If you wanted to rotate and stick with what you have, that's going to work perfectly fine. All right. Panicked from Rod. Panicked with fungicide and used Daconil on my tomatoes. Leaves are yellow and black and seem to spread. So I'm not sure what your question is, but that's okay. You know, Daconil is a name brand. I forget the chemical in there. People made. Some people don't like it. It's really effective. If you have like a crazy outbreak and it's damaging and killing off your garden in organic ways isn't working, sometimes you have to use the other stuff. I'm like 95% organic. I don't mind using the other products. Daconil on a tomato plant is going to work. It gets on the leaves, it stays on the leaves, it doesn't wash off. The good news is that if you're worried about the chemical, you know, you're going to have larger fruit. You can just kind of wash the fruit and it's okay. But it's effective. Question: have you ever used terracotta spikes, and how far away from plants do I spike them? I have not used terracotta spikes. Sorry, Tiny, so I can't answer that. Checking for questions. Karen, who's also a perk member. Some of my garden soil is hard clay. How can I amend it without adding more phosphate? Soil test shown very high in phosphorus. You can always use peat moss and cocoa coir and mix it in. That doesn't do much in the way of nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium. You could always add in compost. Yes, that's going to bring more phosphorus, but at really low amounts, and your garden's going to need that anyway. There's not much else you can do. I mean, mulching, like when I dig a bed now, and getting back to the topic of tomatoes and peppers, say you want to grow tomatoes and peppers, you know, this year. You don't have a garden set up. You can put down like a 4-foot by 4-foot square, 2 layers of cardboard. Just throw some wood mulch on there. That's going to kill out the grass. You're going to have to wait at least 4 weeks for the grass to die off. But once that's set up, say you did that in April, you got a nice little 4 by 4 4-foot by 4-foot square. It's clay. That's what I have. You can just dig 4 planting holes in the 4 corners and really just go down 10 and 12 inches, loosen it up, some compost, some peat moss, organic granular, get the planting hole set up for the tomato plant, plant them or the peppers. They're going to do extremely well. You created a nice little pocket of well-amended soil, the root system set up, then the roots go into the clay. And then you have mulch and cardboard on top. The worms come in, they start eating the cardboard, the mulch, they loosen up the clay soil. So you don't have to fix it all the first year. You can just build great soil over time. I have several videos on that too. I probably have videos on everything I'm talking about. But if you just wanted to kind of get that whole clay section, like a 4-foot by 8-foot bed kind of set up, I would put down, you know, compost, peat moss, cocoa coir, combination of all of them, and just work it into that top 6 inches. The top 2, 4, 6 inches, 8 inches is the most important for surface roots and growing. And then, you know, with time, all that stuff will get pulled down lower into your garden. All right, Jay, I sanitize DIY seedling soil using the microwave. Should I add the fertilizer, for example, worm castings, after sanitizing the soil, or will it hurt the castings if I sanitize them with them? So when I'm seed starting indoors, I don't mind using boiling water or having a sterile starting mix. I don't want any soil life in it. I don't need the microbes right away. We can add them in later when they get out into the garden, and microbes are important outside. The reason you want it sterile is because you don't want fungus gnat eggs, you don't want fungi spores or anything like that. If you microwave them with worm castings, if there's any beneficial microbes, they're going to, kill them off. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium left in the castings isn't going to get damaged. You can't get rid of elements. Like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium is an element. So once it's to its raw form, you can't change it or get rid of it. So if you trust the castings and you know that they aren't bringing anything harmful, I would use them after you sterilize your DIY seed starting mix. And this way it has you're reintroducing the microbes. The reason I say that is some worm casting companies have a great product. I've never seen anything in them that's problematic. Other companies are like worm compost and some castings, and that compost can have other kinds of insect eggs in there that you don't want. So you just have to know the brand. Jay Bay was thinking about using slug bait. Is it safe to use around carrots? I don't have any issues or worries using the slug bait. It has iron phosphate or sulfur in it. It's not like some of the older baits that had I want to say metaldehyde, but I don't think that's it, where it just was a harsh chemical that I wouldn't want. But I've not heard any issue with, iron sulfate or sulfur being problematic using it around plants. Of course, you don't want to pick up handfuls of it and eat it, but just scattered around and used in the garden, I really believe it doesn't get into your plants in any way, shape, or form. All right. Buzzing around looking for questions. So again, if you like this format, I do have a perk membership where I do this 4 or 5 times a month with a smaller group. Tony, can you plant potatoes next to tomatoes? Yes, they're related. You just want to make sure that you're not putting the tomato plant too much. Like some people ask me, can I plant potatoes under tomatoes? The answer is you probably could, but everything's going to grow together. It's going to be problematic. You just want the potatoes to the side enough so that when you go into harvest, you're not damaging the roots of the tomato plant. So when you put in a tomato plant here, it's going to send out lots of surface roots. I mean, they go far. So if you're, too close to that plant and you dig everything up, you're going to damage those roots when, you go to harvest the potatoes. But, if they're, 3 feet away or something like that, yeah, you're going to damage some, but it's not going to make that much of a difference. They are related. So sometimes the same issues that impact potatoes and tomatoes can, cross the plants and stuff like that. Peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, and potatoes, I think are all in the same family, if I got it right. Lady Cat, do I really need to be concerned about planting sunflowers next to my other plants because they are allelopathic, mainly right next to them, my zucchini? Thanks in advance. So allelopathic means that a plant sends out roots, and those roots compete with other roots and kills off those plants. And the answer is maybe, but they're not allelopathic to everything. So when a new sunflower is growing, this is just from experience because I did some experiments. I have wild sunflowers that seeded and are coming up, and strawberries are growing under them. The strawberry plants are fine. I've grown other things next to them, the ones that have seeded themselves. Once a sunflower seems to be established, it seems to leave other plants alone. When I put in a tomato plant and another tomato plant and young sunflowers next to them, both of those tomato plants just grew very slowly while the ones away from it grew larger. So my answer is when that sunflower is first getting started, and if there's really close competition for the space, they can impact your plants. But I think it's more rare, and I think you really have to have them planted really closely together. Steve, my first year asparagus crowns just popped up. When should I give them their first feeding? Container grown in peat and compost with garden tone and bone meal. Thanks, Steve. You can give them a water-soluble fertilizer right now. And that's because, and it sounds like you set up everything nicely. You just want them to grow. You want the greenery to get growing. You want the spears to get tall and fern out. In case you guys don't know, an asparagus plant spear comes up. That's what we're used to harvesting it, like 12 inches, and that's what we see. If you let them grow, they go to 4 or 5 feet tall. They fern out with these really fine leaves. So you can hit them with a water-soluble fertilizer right now and just sit back and let them do their thing. Yeah, thank you, John. I just saw it is metaldehyde. That's toxic. It's bad for water and fish and all that. Iron phosphate, and if you don't want iron phosphate, because people are worried that the phosphate is chelated, which is processed in a way, just use the sulfur baits. They both seem to work. Rosalind, my strawberry plants keep turning yellow. Any suggestions? So it's hard to know without seeing it, but if they are turning yellow, it could be that they're just staying wet too often. Strawberries like water, but they don't like sitting in water. So if you're overwatering, that could be an issue. The other thing is they might need nitrogen. So a water-soluble organic nitrogen, like AgroThrive, like I mentioned, who I'm affiliated with, you can find that in the video description, or a fish emulsion will give them enough nitrogen to help green them up. If you give them the fish emulsion or the water-soluble, and you can use the chemical types too, like Vigoro, Miracle Grow, they're not going to wreck your garden if you're using them for emergencies. You don't want to use the chemical types 24/7. That's a whole different Q&A. But organic fertilizers can be expensive, and I want people not to be fearful to use other products if it gets them food, to the table. So anyway, by using the water soluble, that gives immediate nitrogen in a form the plant can use. And if it doesn't green up in 3, 4, 5 days, then it really wasn't a nitrogen issue. So in my opinion, it's going to be just overwatering and the roots are having a problem growing and getting oxygen, or it's a nitrogen issue. And I usually always start with nitrogen if a plant is yellowing. Hello, Stephanie D. Rod, question, can you dissolve synthetic granulars like a 10-10-10 fertilizer into water soluble? Organic liquid fertilizer is so expensive. So I'm going to say that you can't. You could dissolve it, but it's still going to be not water soluble. Well, let me just think a second. All right, let me restate that. So when you're using organic granular fertilizers, it's usually chicken manure, blood meal, bone meal. You put that into the ground, microbes have to break it down. And as they break it down, they release nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It's a nice slow release fertilizer. If you get synthetic granules, synthetic, not organic, this is why I'm correcting myself, they're usually, little bits and pieces, and they're designed to slowly dissolve with rain and water and slowly release to your plant. Theoretically, you could dissolve them, but you're going to have a really strong fertilizer, and I don't know how to use that. You would be dumping, dissolved synthetic fertilizers into your garden, which can just be high concentrations. Now, synthetic doesn't mean fake nitrogen, fake phosphorus, or fake potassium. The plant can't tell. You can't make fake nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sulfur, or calcium, or anything like that. So I wouldn't do that because you're just not going to know what the ratio is, or you want to do it and you just want it to be really diluted. But to answer your question, yes, you could, but it's going to change how you deliver it to the plant, and I don't know the quantity. I don't know the dilution rate for that. And yes, fertilizers can be really expensive. Nikki, can I start herb seeds in containers, or do they need to be started in seed starts, then transferred? You can start them directly in containers. And containers are nice because they're contained and you can water them and treat them. A lot of times we start them in trays, in seed starting trays, because it's a nice little flat of 72 cells. We can stand over them and over mother them, put them into our grow lights, manage them, and we get 72 little plants. If you were, trying to put them out throughout your garden in different places, and you have 72 different pockets of seeds, then you got to go find them all and water them all. So a lot of times we just start indoors to get a jump on the season, but also that it's easier to take care of. But you could definitely start, if you're doing a couple containers, you just want to make sure the top couple inches stays moist while the seeds germinate, and you'll be fine. Need to find out where I left off here. Sarah, question. I started using lots of peat moss this year to fluff up my clay soil, some in ground and raised beds. Everywhere I go, I have fungus gnats. How can I avoid the fungus gnats without boiling? You can't. Outdoors, it shouldn't become a huge issue. The baking sun, other insects should eventually take care of them. But peat moss has fungus gnat eggs in it. They last for a long time. They are very hardy. That's why when I say when you're using peat moss indoors, I hydrate it with boiling water so it kills everything. Outdoors, it's annoying, but they tend to be killed off. If you want, just let the bed dry out really well. If you put in plants, just water around where the plants are, but let the sun really bake and dry them, and that does help take care of them. Kim Parker, also a perk member. Aspirin spray, saw your video. Do you spray the leaves or just pour it on the ground? So for people that don't know, and I have very specific videos on using aspirin spray on your tomato plants. The acetyl salicylic acid, if I have it right, the compound in aspirin, it has to be aspirin, mimics a hormone in your tomato plant that triggers a response that beefs up the defenses for the tomato plant. You're basically tricking it using aspirin, making it think that this hormone was released because the plant was attacked by a fungus. So the leaves get thicker and they ward off fungus better. It's not a cure-all, like it doesn't cure fungus on your leaves, but it gets the tomato beefed up, so to speak, to keep the problem from spreading. And you can check out that video. But to use it, you put 325 milligrams uncoated aspirin in a gallon of water, dissolve it. You can pour it right on the leaves, to answer your question. You can pour it at the base of the plant. You could do one or the other. You could do both. When you're planting and you're getting a tomato and pepper into that planting hole, which I want to stress again, you could put in an aspirin, and that's probably good for a good 45 to 60 days. Otherwise, every 2 weeks seems a little bit early. 4 weeks seems a little bit too long, but 2 to 3 weeks, just quickly soak your tomato plants with the aspirin mix, and that will beef up their defenses. All right. Polite Chihuahua. For clay soil, I use a broad fork to break up the soil instead of tilling it. Plus, it's a good workout. That's a really good recommendation. I just wanted to point that out. A broad fork has flatter tines. It's really strong. Goes down a good 10 to 12 inches. You can put that into your clay soil and just rock back and forth. That loosens it up, and that will start, the process of your soil getting better. All right, trying to find some questions here. Nina, do I need to harden up sweet potato slips? You do a little bit, not as much, because they're usually sitting by a window, but anytime you're growing indoors where a plant is not being hit directly by the sun outside, it's not necessarily used to the UV rays of the sun. So you do have to harden the sweet potato slips off a bit. Okay, I'm planting 2 beefsteak tomatoes. One is not growing as big as the other. Should I take the smaller one out and replace it with something else? If the smaller plant is green and looks okay, it might be having some trouble getting the roots going, I would hit it with a big drink of a water-soluble fertilizer of your choice. See if that gets it going. Tomato plants may be different sizes right now, but as the root system's established and the warmth comes, smaller plants very quickly catch up to the bigger plants. If you don't like the way it looks because the leaves are distorted or it's yellow or it looks sickly versus just being smaller, go ahead and transfer it or remove it and put in another plant. Redefining me. How long can seeds stay in the soil before rotting? Planted brassicas 4 weeks ago, still haven't germinated. Limited sun this spring, zone 3. So I don't really know the answer to this, but I can tell you that my tomato seeds, my pepper seeds, my sunflower seeds, my bean seeds that all kind of rotted on fruit and fell to the ground back in November, germinated in April and May. So that's, December, January, February, March, April, May. I mean, 5 or 6 months. So seeds can last a really long time. Some seeds last years in the ground. The question is if they germinated and then they died before they broke the surface. That can happen sometimes. If you are in a colder zone, it may just be too cold. Even though the seeds are viable, they're just waiting for the right warmth period to come. So if I miss your question, you please put it back out there. There's a lot that comes through here, but I just saw KT say, how long is neem oil good? Did I miss the question? Yes, I did, but I saw that. Neem oil, I've kept and used for 2 seasons. I haven't used it past that, but it's usually good for 2 seasons at least. It can get congealed. It can, become kind of this light tan color. It thickens up. That's what happens to cold pressed neem oil. That's how you know you have the right stuff. The hydrophobic extract, they say they're doing you a favor. They're refining it so that it doesn't do all that. Don't listen to them. So you just put that congealed, that thickened neem oil into some warm to hot tap water. It'll liquefy and you can go ahead and use it. But I've used it for 2 full growing seasons from the same bottle. Caroline, also a perk member and a newer perk member. That's why her star is blue. I planted my early girl and cherry tomato plants. They have flowers on. Should I leave them or take them off? If the plants aren't really to like 2 feet yet, I would remove them from the cherry tomato plant. Cherry tomatoes are going to take off and do fine. If both plants look like they're healthy and growing, if the early girl has like more than 6 or 9 flowers on there, I would remove those too. Sometimes I like to leave a couple on there. But to answer your question, if the plants are really under 2 feet, you could remove them. And you're just doing that to give the plant a little more boost towards the leaves and the root growth. J.K. Gardner. Plants like corn is a heavy eater, heavy feeder. So do I just fertilize with a nitrogen nutrient like fish emulsion every 2 weeks, or should it be more often? Use blood meal and alfalfa pellets. So the blood meal and alfalfa pellets are going to take time to break down, and usually that's incorporated into the soil with compost and organic granular first. So let's assume you set the bed up really well with nutrients. Every 2 weeks is a pretty good routine for fish emulsion and corn. So I would stick with that. You don't really need to do it more often. Keep an eye on it. You might have to do it more often. Like I have videos on growing 64 stalks of corn in a 4 foot by 4 foot space. That's planted more closely together. It worked. It was successful. But I had to water a lot more often, like 4 or 5 times a week. And I was feeding them, every 7 to 14 days. Let's just say every 10 days as they got bigger. I also put compost down at mid-growth, so you need more. But if you're, doing a standard planting every 2 weeks with the fish emulsion should work for you. And again, if I've missed your question, please just copy it and throw it back out here. We're at 11:39. So for tomatoes and peppers, we're all, like my tomatoes and peppers are in the ground, they're taking off. There is no need to rush them, So a couple things I just want to point out. Years ago, I was like, I want an 8-week, 10-week-old tomato transplant. I want really big upper growth. I want these massive plants going out. I was putting them out in April, protecting them. The soil was too cold. It was sort of a waste of time because my soil doesn't really get to that top couple of inches, 2, 4, 6 inches, doesn't really get to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And what is that? 15.5 degrees Celsius, somewhere close to that, until really the end of April now, beginning of May. Your tomato plants, no matter how early you put them out, if that soil is cold, they're going to get dark green, sometimes purple. They kind of shiver. They don't grow. The roots don't grow. Yes, we can protect them from the frost, but they're not doing anything. That's why sometimes when you put a transplant out too early and then you have a seed pop up on its own into the warm soil, that plant quickly catches up to your transplant. I was also growing the transplants too long. Peppers, I do like, 10 weeks worth of growth. They're slower growers. Tomatoes only need like 4 or 6 weeks. Maybe a tomato transplant that is this big. I would grow them in larger containers, have a nice root system, and I would time it so when they're 4 to 6 weeks old, maybe 8 weeks at the most, they're getting into your soil when that soil temperature is about 60 degrees. That's when the nights are like 50, the days are getting into the 70s, you're getting warm rains. Those plants are going to take off in like 7 or 10 days and just get huge. All the extra energy of growing them longer, getting them out earlier, doesn't do a whole lot. And this is all just from experience. So I changed my timing a little bit, and my plants right now are just as big, as they would be if I spent all this time growing larger transplants, trying to keep them warm, putting down black tarp or plastic, wrapping them, all that kind of stuff. It's the root system. When that root system is warm for your tomatoes, your peppers, your cucumbers, all your warm weather crops, hence the name, they just accelerate with massive green growth. Rhonda, question. Great segue. Have they been put into a book? So I have 2 books. You can find them on Amazon. This is The Modern Homestead Garden. It's, 3 years old. It's really everything you need to know to get started, growing a garden. And it's really in depth, teaches you about seed starting, all kinds of different things. My other book that just came out this year is Growing an Edible Landscape. There are a couple chapters on specifically vegetable gardening, but this really takes you out of the traditional garden and talks about integrating plants like grapes and blueberries and strawberries into your native or into your ornamental beds, getting rid of the ornamental plants, putting in different fruits and vegetables that grow. But this is great too. It teaches you about how to have a vegetable garden, but also takes you to the next step. And you can find both of them on Amazon or wherever you want to buy a book. And if you just search, here's my name, Gary Pilarczyk, on the bookstores, these books will pop up. Arturo, hello from California. All right, I'm going to take a second here to figure out where I left off. And we are at 11:42. I will go to 12 o'clock. If you have a question that is burning, if you want to do a super chat, that will, throw the question to the top and I will answer that right away. Because this is the point where I just don't get to everything. Seeds are rotting. Keep growing with Mara. Some of my sweet potato slips are super long, 18 inches. I'm rooting them now. Do I need to cut them back? Well, that's pretty long. I would cut, I'd like my slips to be about 8 inches, so I would cut them back. 18 inches is just really long. Because they're going to need a good 2 weeks to root out. So, they're just going to be really long. Helen, is Alaska More Bloom good to fertilize tomatoes once the flowers bloom, or should I use something else? So, More Bloom is just a 0, no nitrogen, 10 phosphorus, 10 potassium. And it's fine to use one time at that stage you're talking about, when your peppers and tomatoes start blooming. The idea is, and it's true, that when you add in phosphorus and potassium, it can give the plants more of what they need, and this is a water-soluble form, so they can pull that potassium and phosphorus right away. It helps with more blooms, hence the name, More Bloom. I would just use it once. I used it before. I didn't notice a huge difference. My beds are pretty well prepared. Just remember that compost that you make is well below a 111 NP and K. and it has nutrients in water-soluble form. It's still breaking down sometimes. But if your beds are well prepared, the plants can find everything they need to grow well. By giving them the more bloom, and it's great for containers because containers are kind of the imperfect growing medium, I would use the 0-10-10 more in containers, or just as a one-shot deal, and then just go back to, a general all-purpose fertilizer. John, I saw your question. So again, remember, you got to put question in front. Yes, coffee grounds thrown in a compost pile are great. They're great addition for nitrogen. L, what's the difference between slug bait and wool pellets? And some folks saying slug bait will attract slugs. That is BS. Surely if they're going to come, they're already come. Yes, slug baits, first of all, slugs don't move that fast. So you're broadly scattering the slug baits around, hoping they crawl slowly by one, and they'll smell it, they'll go to it, they'll eat it, they'll die. They are not going to bring slugs from your neighbor's house over to your house. They're not going to bring them from down the road. So yes, don't worry about that. Slug baits work really well because they attract the slugs in your general vicinity, kills them off. You want to do it, at least every 3 to 4 weeks, and you want to do it a couple of times because you could have eggs hatching. So you could have new slugs coming up. But if you do it regularly, you really do get them under control. I usually start mine back in probably March when it starts warming up here, before I have any plants really growing, and it's just the slug baits, and that kills off the slugs, snails, and gets them under control before all my brassicas and stuff go in. I am not familiar with wool pellets. I mean, wool pellets sounds like it might be something that they don't like crawling on or going by, or I just don't know what they are, I've seen them. I've actually learned about them for a organic type fertilizer, but I don't know how they would work with snails and slugs. Question, trying to grow slow bolt bib lettuce inside during summer under my seed startup. They won't do well in the summer. Recommended container size. So indoors, I mean, in theory, you could have, this much soil and a bib lettuce in here if you're doing more hydroponic or you're supplying more nutrients regularly. So it's really up to you. I mean, you don't need anything massive. It might be nicer to have a flower box or something like that. That's, 4 to 6 inches deep. But I would experiment around with some different sizes and see what works for you. All right, so Chris, what might be digging up and eating my melon and cucumber seedlings? I suspect birds because there are no tracks, and I have chicken wire to keep out rabbits. So it's probably birds. And one thing that I do for new seedlings, because they do, I have birds everywhere, by the way. I have bird feeders. They don't bother my blueberries, my strawberries. A specific bird species will go after my blueberries, but they haven't come in full force. But they do peck my sunflowers when I do plant some myself. I go to the dollar store and I buy the dish racks, for washing dishes and letting them dry for like $2 on sale. Put them over your seedlings, over your squash, over your cucumbers, or take some of your chicken wire, make a dome and set it over where you plant the seeds. That will buy them enough time to grow and establish and get large. The birds won't get into there, and then just remove those cages or the dish rack when you're done. And I do have videos on that too. Crockett P. I didn't realize that I had an indeterminate tomato and planted it in my GreenStalk a few weeks ago. Should I remove it and plant it? Yes. In theory, you have 7 gallons in the tier of the GreenStalks, and I highly recommend, if you want to grow vertically, I'm affiliated with GreenStalk Garden. Check out my video description, save some money, use my code. Those tiers are 7 gallons. You could grow one indeterminate tomato in there, but nothing else. You'd have to water it very often, feed it very often, and it's going to grow 5, 6, 7 feet out all over the place. Now, just for fun, I grew an indeterminate in the bottom tier of a GreenStalk one year, and then as it grew up, I tucked the vines into the other pockets and put a weight on them, and those vines rooted out. So the whole tier was home for just one indeterminate tomato plant, and it was cool and it worked. It wasn't so practical because it would have been just better, one plant in the ground, you know. But to answer your question, getting off my tangent, I would definitely remove it. I have tiny Tims growing in my GreenStalks right now. You can do the dwarf varieties, even the determinate types like aroma that gets 2 or 3 feet tall, you can do in a pocket or something like that. Where are we at? All right, 10 minutes left. Sarah, I planted potatoes in 5-gallon buckets on March 23rd without knowing the variety. I don't know whether they're determinate or indeterminate. What should I do? Nothing. I mean, if you set it up and you fill the container, typically you start your potatoes 4 to 6 inches deep. Determinate variety just sends out the potatoes at a specific space on the stem that's underground. They develop. Indeterminate will send out more potatoes along the vine as you bury it. So if you're planting an indeterminate, sometimes you plant, if the container is as big as a screen, you fill the container halfway with soil, drop in the indeterminate, and then when it gets tall, you add in some more soil up here, and then you get potatoes along that whole space. If you didn't set the container up for indeterminate growing, then just pretend they're determinates. Usually if they are like a russet potato, they're indeterminate. Red potatoes, Yukon Golds, they're determinate variety. But either way, you're going to get potatoes. Ants are tough. So, Posey, how do you get ants off of okra plants? Neem oil isn't working. Well, that's because the neem oil, they'd have to eat and ingest the plant. I would use borax. It's 4 tablespoons of sugar, 1 tablespoon of borax, a little bit of water, mix it together. I put it in a mason jar, poke holes in it so my pets can't get to it. Put it down. The sugar-eating ants eat that, it kills them off. So just check out borax ant baits on my channel, and that's how I would get rid of them. Borax works really well. You can find borax usually where laundry detergents are. The name brand is borax. I think borax is like sodium tetraphosphate or something. Don't quote me on that. But borax is the name brand. You just want the chemical that it's made out of. You're mixing that with sugar and it eats. And the ants eat it and they die off. Elizabeth. Hi, Gary. Please tell me. Oh, good. I caught your question. But anytime that you're coming. Well, let me start over. Every second and fourth Thursday of the month, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, I do this live Q&A with a light topic. And it's just best because so many questions come through here. Just put question next to your question. But Elizabeth says, tell me about clay breaker and powdered plaster or gypsum. Here, a lot of people who have clay soil problems. I'm all in favor of new gardeners getting into growing. So I've never used them. And I don't know how much to use. There is some truth that gypsum and clay breaker, which is usually gypsum, I'm not sure about powdered plaster, but it reacts with the clay, helps loosen it up. But you can't just lay it on top there. You're still going to have to mix it in. And, for new gardeners and any of us really, I would rather throw down peat moss, cocoa coir combo, compost, combination of all of it, and just turn and work the top 2, 4, 6, 8 inches. You hear a lot of stuff saying, don't turn your bed, you're killing the soil life. That's fine, But when you're first establishing your bed, just simply lifting and turning the soil, breaking it up, putting in the garden fork like somebody suggested and loosening up, that's not going to wreck your soil life. It's when you get a tiller and you grind and you pulverize everything, that's really bad. So the first year or two, you might have to kind of put in a shovel, just flip everything over, start getting air in there, start breaking it up, and nature will break it down. I just don't know enough about the gypsum it's not like, I know it's not a miracle product where you just scatter it down and you come back and you have great soil. You really still have to work it in. So in that case, I'd rather do what I said. Nox runner. Are certain tomato plants more resistant to bugs such as flea beetles? Tomato plants and hybrids can be more resistant to fungus and viruses and stuff like that. I don't know of any plant that's more resistant to insects such as flea beetles. And flea beetles love eggplant, tomatoes first. Well, actually, they destroy my eggplant, so I have to put dust on them. And I have videos on treating eggplant with insect dust. And then they will go to my tomatoes. They tend to leave my peppers and my potatoes alone, but they just do wreck my eggplant. All right, where are we at? All right, 5 minutes left. Neil, nighttime temps in my area is still in the mid to high 40s. Can I plant my peppers or should I wait? Well, that's a good question for kind of where I want to wrap up with the little presentation on tomatoes and peppers. I would wait. Peppers can go longer in the containers. If for some reason they're flowering, remove the flowers. But getting your pepper plant or your tomato plant into soil where the nights are still staying in the 40s and even in the low 50s, and maybe the days are sometimes only in the 50s, that plant is just not going to do anything for you. So you're better off, holding on to it, waiting till, the temperatures rise, getting it into that warm soil, and they're going to take off. Derek, is it counterproductive to add worm casting to starter soil and then boil it to sterilize it and remove the fungus gnats? No, I did just answer this question, which is fine, but it's a good question. If you want the microbes from the worm castings, you're going to kill them off. That's just what's going to happen. If you want the benefit of like the nitrogen, phosphorus, and stuff, sometimes worms secrete other chemicals that benefit root growth and stuff. I don't think that chemicals necessarily destroyed by boiling water. I don't know. But if you have a good quality worm casting that doesn't necessarily bring in the fungus, gnat, and other problems, I would add it afterwards. It depends on what you're trying to keep. But if you're trying to keep microbes that might be in the casting or the bacteria and stuff that's dormant, the boiling water usually does kill that. Stephanie, and we're just about finishing up. I'll take a couple more questions right till 12. For cherry tomatoes, would you recommend planting closer together in a single stem fashion or space them out more, allowing the suckers to grow instead, which might have higher production? So for cherry tomatoes, if you single stem them, they're just not going to be as productive. I would definitely go with spacing them out more, letting them kind of go wild, pruning to keep the airflow in, remove some of the suckers to keep the size in, but you're going to get much more production on spacing them out more and just letting the cherry tomatoes go wild. For single stem pruning, when you're growing 6, 8 ounce, 1 pound tomatoes, doing a single stem or a double stem makes more sense, and you contain the plant that way. Arturo, I'm starting a strawberry tower. Any recommendations on your favorite strawberries to grow? No, but I'm going to be releasing a strawberry video tomorrow morning, and what I recommend in there is to mix your tower up with June-bearing strawberries, any variety, and ever-bearing strawberries, any variety. And if you're able to, get a couple different varieties of June-bearing, a couple different varieties of ever-bearing. Randomly put them into your towers. And you're going to get a big production from the June-bearing in June. That's why they're called that. And then they slow down and you get a couple over time over the summer. The ever-bearing produce less quantity all at once, but produce over the season. And by mixing up the different varieties, your towers are going to stay productive for the summer. And I'll have more information on that when that video goes out tomorrow morning. You can't test for grazon in manure. Just saw that one. Is it a bad idea to use colored mulch? I don't know what's in colored mulch. I wouldn't recommend using it. It's probably safe technically, but because I can't easily find what it is, I'm not going to use it. And I would usually go with the shredded hardwood that's just natural. That's usually, you know, works really well. Crockett, appreciate the love for the Q&As. And I'm going to keep doing this again for people just coming in every Tuesday and Thursday. Not sorry, that's not even close to being right. Every second Thursday, every fourth Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Blue Veil, your aspirin trick for tomatoes. How soon after you transplant do you do that? So you can put an aspirin in a hole at transplanting and just let it sit in there, and it's good for, at least in my opinion, a good 60 days. I usually wait till the tomatoes are about, I don't know, a foot and a half to 2 feet tall, and then I hit them with my first spray if you just want to, drizzle water, the aspirin water over them or in the soil. All right, we are at 12 o'clock, so I will see all you guys next time. Again, since I butchered it earlier, second Thursday, fourth Thursday of the month, 11 a.m. garden Q&A. You guys take care.